exacerbated by the universal voucher expansion that was passed in 2022. The program grew from roughly 12,000 students in that year, most of them students with disabilities, to now over 75,000 students. I believe this universal expansion has degraded services for students with real disabilities who have relied on the program and for whom it was originally designed. This fraud is a slap to the face of any parent that has children with disabilities. They now have to compete for the time and resources of ADE staff with tens of thousands of new students in the program, many of whom were already attending private schools on their parents' dime before this taxpayer-funded coupon for the wealthy was passed by the legislature. And not only did the legislature expand this program with basically no additional guardrails, but they also failed to pass a more limited expansion for low-income students that was proposed by former Senator Boyer. What is even worse, the legislature also relaxed requirements on who could provide a diagnosis for special education students that makes a student eligible for the higher amounts of funding. And I think that's obviously a really important factor here. Previously, I believe that public school districts had to provide the diagnosis in a traditional evaluation setting. Now, any doctor or medical provider can provide a diagnosis that sets up another avenue for fraud or abuse. And we saw in this case falsified diagnoses. All 17 children in this case, even the fake ones, had falsified disability documents associated with them. Let me repeat that. All 17 children, even the fake ones, had falsified disability documents. The defendants in this case we are announcing today took advantage of the lack of controls and regulations and apparently easily defeated and defrauded the ESA program. The employees were not fired until our investigators began looking closely into the activity. So it's impossible to say how long this would have continued without this investigation by my office. Our investigators were tipped off about this case, not by the Arizona Department of Education, but rather by a credit union who noticed unusually large in-person cash withdrawals and contacted our office. And this is not the end of this investigation. We are currently working on multiple potential investigations into fraud, waste, and abuse in the ESA program, and we will share more information with the public when we're able to do so. I believe it is high time for the legislature to get serious about putting some regulations in place to prevent the fraud that we're seeing today from happening in the first place. And let me be very, very clear. This is not about school choice or any other ideological debate about education. It's about a program that, like we have seen with the access fraud, is an easy target for criminals because it's a large pot of money without enough oversight, not by a long shot. And while we face a $2 billion deficit in this state, And while our schools and teachers are struggling to maintain salaries and have their salaries increased, and while law enforcement, including the brave men and women who work in this building, are struggling with shortages as well, the majority party in the legislature is seemingly fine with this fraud happening because they have passed literally no legislation to regulate and provide oversight of this program. As I mentioned, we do not know how deep this fraud goes, but we will get to the bottom of it. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Let's start out with the timelines here. So these people go back prior to the current administration. So, is this a fraud that has spanned both the Hoffman administration and the Horn administration, or what?
We don't know. We don't believe so. These employees predate the Horn administration, but we believe that the fraud really began when the universal expansion opened up eligibility for all students in late 2022. The ghost students that I mentioned earlier were actually accepted into the program in early 2023. It is possible fraud was occurring prior to that point, but we believe it ramped up really at the beginning of 2023.
Just explain the process by which they determined that these kids did not exist. It must have been fairly simple, but if you could just take us through that process, how they were able to pin down that these kids did not exist at all.
Yeah, I don't want to go through too much of our investigative techniques, but obviously we were tipped off by the credit union about these withdrawals. We then started asking questions. We have had some working cooperation with the head of the ESA program inside ADE, and John Ward. He has been cooperative with us. I do not know the level to which Superintendent Horn is aware of this fraud, and ADE did ultimately fire these employees, but our investigators began looking into the documents that had been provided to ADE, asked for those documents, and received what you're looking at today.
When were the employees fired, and of the 17 children referenced, how many are fake and how many are real?
Let's go back to that last part. The ones in red, Mary Jo, are fake. So 5 out of 17 are ghost children.
And they all belong to those 3 people, Dolores and Dorian and Jennifer, all the kids involved?
Good question. So let me put it this way, okay? And I'm going to be very, very careful the way I answer this question.
You can be vague.
I'm not going to be vague. I'm going to be as specific as I can, given that we obviously have an ongoing investigation and we have some redacted boxes up there. Some of whom are children who exist, and we're not going to disclose their names. Some of whom are adults. The individuals in the larger boxes on the second row are largely, I believe, adults. Those are adults. So the ghost children were registered on this row here. I'm just going to come over here and point out. These ghost children were registered at Dolores Suite's address. So these children were registered in ADE documentation and ESA documentation at Dolores Suite's address.
Okay, but you have your little flow chart, if you want to call it that there, has 2 adults, 2, 5, 10 children under Dolores. Explain how that works.
These are adult children.
Okay, but are they, I understand, okay, either way.
Same address.
You have, okay, so let's take Dolores.
Mm-hmm.
You have 3 separate divisions, and underneath those, you have 2, 5, and 3. explain how they all relate to Dolores.
Well, as I said, the ghost children beneath her, I believe all 5 are registered at the same address
Yeah, I'm
as
talking
Dolores.
about the black boxes.
I- Do you want to answer?
All 10
All 10. Okay.
are registered at Dolores' address.
Okay.
Okay.
And some of them are, the adults that are identified there, are they adults with special needs? I mean, like, children who are older than 18?
I'm not going to go into that right now, Mary Jo. I don't want to. There are some details we're not going to divulge because the investigation is ongoing.
And when were the ADE employees?
Yeah, you wanted to know when they were terminated in the fall of, I believe, 2023, if I'm not mistaken. The fall of 2023, and I think I might be able to get you a date.
You've got August under Dolores, and then you've got November under Dorian and Jennifer, so I don't
Yeah,
understand.
that's correct. August and November.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you have a sense as to how prevalent this fraud is? I mean, is this just an outlier, or is it more common than we think?
That's what we want to get to the bottom of. And I think I will tell you this from what our investigators found. There are very few controls and very little accountability in terms of analyzing birth certificates at the Department of Education, at analyzing determinations of disability. And one of the issues is, does ADE even have the resources right now to analyze those birth certificates? Let me go back. I want to go back to the birth certificate. You can see here clearly this is the template of a real birth certificate, because as I was thinking, it looks a lot like my own daughter's birth certificate. But here there was a tear in the birth certificate, and then it was various forgeries were made in the actual template. There are legitimate questions about how many of these birth certificates are actually being scrutinized by the Arizona Department of Education and what they're doing to scrutinize them. I am not aware that they are sending them out to a third party to scrutinize them. And I think it's a really fair question, and it's really scary, because this program has now ballooned to 73,000 or more than 70,000 students, and all you have to do is provide essentially a birth certificate.
Was Horn cooperative in this investigation, and what was this money being spent on? $600,000. What were the funds going towards?
I'm not going to talk about that. Obviously, we are going to present evidence about that in court. But I will say generically, it's given what we have seen, it's a huge concern that this money, and sometimes we're talking upwards of $20,000 to $40,000 going to parents if their child qualifies with a disability, whether legitimately or fraudulently. And so a lot of things are being bought that you would not associate with educational activities, let's put it that way. I'm not going to speak specifically to these cases, but we certainly are aware of that, and we are seeing that. What was the first part of your question?
Was Horn cooperative?
Look, what I would say is Tom Horn's, the head of Tom Horn's ESA program, John Ward, has been cooperative. I can't say that it's very cooperative of Tom Horn to go out and claim that there's no fraud in this program when there clearly is, and there clearly is serious fraud. So that's not very cooperative. And I think it would be incumbent on any superintendent of public instruction to immediately, seeing these results and knowing that you'd already fired these people to go to the legislature and ask for controls and accountability on this program.
Attorney General, thank you. Would you, like, I know it's premature, like you alluded this earlier. Is it like an organized crime you think that is happening? I know you're still investigating, or is it just like a fluke of a couple of people just getting it together and doing it? So do you see like a ramification of like as a whole state or just like individuals?
Well, we're going to try to flesh that out. Whether this particular scheme meets organized crime levels, we will ultimately determine through the course of the litigation. But what I'm most concerned about is how ripe the program clearly is for this kind of abuse. It was very easy for these individuals to do this. And I think we all have to be asking the question, is it being replicated? One of the things that we saw in the Access Sober Living Home fraud is that this kind of thing became well known, right, in the community. And so more and more people started to engage in this kind of fraud or were persuaded that somehow this was okay. And so, you know, I'm also extremly concerned about the fact that under the legislature's under the way the legislature has written the law, an individual can go to virtually any kind of doctor they want to get a disability diagnosis. I mean, any kind of doctor. And you know, that seems to be highly problematic.
In this case, did they go to a doctor or did they just falsify the whole thing? Was it a fake doctor?
We believe that these were all just falsified.
And for the real children that are involved in this, did any of them get any educational services?
Not going to talk about that right now, but.
Are you able to tell us how much of what the withdrawals were, like range, how much money they took out?
Well, I mean, the total was over $600,000. So again, you know, you think about the fact. Obviously, we stopped it. We stopped this particular fraud, but that could have been perpetuated over years, and it could have been millions and millions of dollars. And then, of course, we're still looking at other potential perpetrators of this, and will most likely find more money that has been lost to the state.
When you say you believe there are falsified documents, would this be non-existent contractors or contractors listed as businesses but not actually doing work?
That's a whole separate issue, and we're also looking at that. So you're talking about vendor fraud. We're talking about the documents that have to go to ADE to get your child into the ESA program. Number one, a birth certificate to prove that you actually are a child in the state of Arizona. Number two, if you're asking for those elevated amounts of money, a diagnosis that you have, for instance, autism. And so those are the two things right now that I'm talking about, but you're talking about something else that's also very important.
The diagnosis, actually. So
yeah.
That diagnosis, did they provide a diagnosis document that was simply from a non-existent provider, or was it someone who's listed as a business on state records, but that doesn't actually do business? That's something we've...
I might have to come back to you on that. Yeah, okay, so what we're saying is they were forged. They were simply forged.
Okay, and then secondly, I know Superintendent Horn recently said he's submitted over 20 cases to your office in recent months. Can you comment on if that's true and what the status may be of those?
We'll have to get back to you on that. I'm not aware of 20 different cases, but you know, they are not these kinds of cases. Let's put it that way.
Can you talk about what that money that they withdrew was spent on?
Again, I can't. We'll provide those details at a future date.
What does the timeline on this case look like? When did the indictment come in?
The indictment came in on Monday, I believe. Monday, on this Monday, and I don't want to set a timeline. You know, we will work our way through the case.
Okay. Is anybody in custody? Have they been arrested, served, whatever? What's
They
the
have
status?
been served.
Okay. Is there a date for an initial hearing? I have to presume.
March 28th, I'm being told.
Okay.
Yep.
What's the penalty on these kind of charges?
Well, they're obviously felonies, and so we'll discuss that at a later date and in pleadings and filings.
As we understand the program, money is not dispersed to parents until ADE has determined that what they're asking for is a proper curriculum or a proper educational tool. So, I mean, they weren't just handed $600,000. There had to be some, I mean, are you able to tie it to what service, or what curriculum, or what tuition they were?
I don't think that was a big part of the calculus.
Well, okay, but
You're saying they submitted the paperwork and they just got a check?
These people were working in the program and approving it.
Right. So these were, remember, these were employees, right? That's the disconnect. These were employees who were just approving it themselves.
So they worked for the ESA program, they committed the fraud, and they were approving it themselves?
Correct.
Okay. How easy is that?
It's pretty easy. It's pretty easy, especially when you have no controls on the program.
I know you can't speak to what the money was spent on right now, but is it accurate to generally say that these were frivolous purchases, luxury purchases, perhaps?
I'm going to characterize them as luxury purchases. Yes.
Another question from somebody who hasn't asked already.
Yeah.
So I know we can't get too into timeline, but you mentioned speaking with John Ward, but I do know there was a change in ESA leadership in 2023. So was there any communication with the prior ESA director, or was this just with Ward?
I think it was just with Ward because I believe, subject to check, that the investigation, we were notified by the bank after that. Okay. So so I would say, yeah, Ward has been supportive and has provided all documentations to us so far. But like I said, we will do whatever we have to do and use whatever legal tools we have to use to continue to dig into this.
To be clear, when did this start, this investigation?
August of 23, yeah.
And were these 5 people working together, or they're separate instances? Were they all working in collaboration with each other?
We believe they were. Yeah.
Working together?
Yes.
Did they have a relationship, or was it just co-workers?
They were co-workers,
Okay.
yeah, to that extent, yeah.
We're going to get copies of the indictment documents.
They are in your inbox now.
They're already in your inbox.
That's great, and I can print it out as soon as I get back to the office and look through it in detail, and then ask the questions then, because we're supposed to be able to ask them now.
Yeah.
He got you, that was the
We're full service around here. Yes, Barbara.
Began after, and I remember I was there when Governor Ducey signed the universal ESA bill. Can we assume this happened after, all these things happened after the summer of 2022? Or could the activity start before then?
I think I would characterize it as it started after. I mean, we really think the fraud started after the universal expansion. It's possible that there was fraud prior to that, but really this level of fraud started after the universal expansion and after the failure of the legislature to put any real controls and accountability in the system. And so that leaves the Attorney General to be the one providing accountability and providing oversight and policing this program. And I promised the people of Arizona that I would do that. That's not the best way to go about this. That is not the optimal way to go about this. The optimal way to go about this is to, number one, not have a massive program that is ripe for abuse, and number two, to have controls in place that prevent fraud in the first place. And that is not what we have right now in the Voucher / ESA program.
So I apologize if this is redundant, but so you said the investigation started in August of last year, right? And so did that termination, that from of these employees, that came once the investigation started, or were they terminated and then the investigation started? Termination after?
Yeah, after.
Okay.
It was after the investigation. And again, we were not, the referral was not made by Tom Horn, it was made by a bank.
Okay, and then do you know who made the decision to terminate?
I don't. You'll have to ask ADE about that.
So should we expect more to come on the,
Yes.
where you'll unveil the black boxes?
Yeah, there'll be more to come in this investigation. And there will be more to come in terms of our office trying to get to the bottom of how deep this fraud goes, both on the disability determination side and on this birth certificate angle. So I think that's two important areas. And then there's the potential vendor fraud as well.
Well, that's where we're coming down to. You know, we've all seen the reports of the massive Lego toys, the ski trips, the sports stuff, which now gets into a judgment call on what is, because, schools have gymnasiums, schools have field trips. So is there an active investigation going on as to the expenditure of things that have been reimbursed?
To the degree, what I would say is right now, to the degree that we are looking at, fraud in the system related to children who don't exist or who got fraudulent diagnoses, we are looking at what was purchased with all of that money. But I think to your point right now, the way the law is written, it feels as though almost anything goes. And that is egregious and outrageous. Again, I think it's a slap in the face primarily to the parents of children living with autism or with disabilities, because that's where this program started. And, my sister is a teacher in California who teaches children living with autism. This is an extremely difficult area for instruction. And in my mind, it's autism can be taught, or children with autism can be taught in the classroom, but it can also be taught using these ESAs. But that is not what it is right now. It has ballooned way beyond that. And so what I hope is the legislature takes this information and comes to the realization, finally comes to a conclusion that we all can see, that every Arizonan can see, which is that the program they've set up is ripe for abuse. And that their job, their number one job, is to be good stewards of the taxpayers' money. Obviously, I am trying to do that by prosecuting these cases, but they need to design a better program.
I have one more question. I'm reading through this indictment right now, and I know you said there was possible fraud that could have taken place before early 2023, but it says in here during period of time beginning on or about October 14th, 2021. What was the determination of that being the start date for that range?
I may allow our agents to answer that question, I think it was. We'll get you an answer in a second.
It's when the first child was signed up.
Oh, it's when the first child was signed up.
That's a real child.
A real child.
Real child, first child. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
We're gonna have to wrap it up now.
Okay, all right, thank you guys.
Thank you. One more question.
One more, okay, one more.
Real quick, so those three were working for the ESA program, and then her two what was their role in it? Suites?
I'm not gonna go into those details today. We'll get you more information down the road about that.
The BLI also were trying to figure out where the parents, are those black boxes, are they supposed to be the parents?
We can't comment on that.
Can't comment on that yet.
Okay.
So, sorry,
Thank you
Barbara.
so much,
All right, thank you guys.
everyone. I'll help get everybody out.
Fun as always, dear.
I know. I'm worried I missed you. You guys are all too busy down at the legislature.